I wanted to ask the cat to come over and serve as decoration because he's black and would match my thematic beverage for today, but alas, I have a backup plan. Hello, welcome.
Intro?
Today I'm drinking Oshi energy water in the flavor Siri. I hope it's actually pomegranate flavor. So you can tell the theme of this video from the title. I just watched Shang-Chi and the Legend of Ten Rings yesterday. It was the day it premiered and I'm so glad that I managed to watch it. This video... Oh... Where's the black? This video will be split into two parts. I will give timestamps somewhere. And the first part will be my commentary on the MCU, and the second part will be my review of Shang-Chi, so we can just skip to that if you want to. Yep, it's pomegranate flavored water. That's a bummer. So, I was a fan of the MCU for a long time. Not since the beginning, can't claim that, because I did not go to the cinema to see Iron Man. However, after seeing Captain America in the cinema, I kind of had my come to Jesus or come to MCU moment and realized that I like that kind of movies, that I liked superheroes. I started reading comics right about then, and in general, got involved in the whole Avengers, or in general, Marvel universe. I might be more of an X-Men person. Anyhow, after that, I went to the cinema for every single movie except for Thor, because I just could not be arsed to see that in the cinema. I watched it later on DVD at some person's place. In general, I've seen all the movies, and after the build-up to the endgame, and I watched the endgame, this thing that MCU has been building up to for about a decade at this point, I believe, the only thing that I felt was, phew, it's done. I no longer have to watch any of these things, and it's very easy for me to trace as to why I felt that way. After Iron Man 1, the focus of the MCU was not really to make good movies, but more so for a while to make good MCU installments, such as Winter Soldiers or the first Avengers film. I don't know whether Winter Soldier stands on its own as a movie. I love it, partially because it's Captain America, partially because Bucky's there, and the fight sequences are great, but never mind. And then it allowed itself to release even things that I would just call soulless plot along pushers, sorry not sorry, such as both Ant-Man's, first two Thors, and even Avengers Ultron. Not that there was no effort put there and they didn't serve their role, but I've never heard anyone say any of those movies are their favorite, and that's because there's no substance to them. And I think the biggest indicator to the lack of substance in a lot of Marvel movies is how protective Marvel was over spoilers. In general, it's my belief that people, and Americans specifically, put way too much importance on being surprised by the story. But if the story will be ruined completely by knowing a single thing about it, that means that the story has no substance. And the last Avengers films, the Endgame and the one before that, the Snap Game, they were essentially just collections of cameos and little mini things. Yeah, I mean, emotionally I like them, but as movies they are not too great. But at some point in, I think, phase 3, there was a light in the tunnel, because more peripheral movies were allowed to have flavor, to have soul, and to be their own thing. Examples of that are, starting from the top, Thor Ragnarok is a Taika Waititi movie. It is also kind of like 80s inspired action flick, not the action sequences, but the movies and the aesthetics very much so. Can you tell that it's my favorite? Spider-Man stands on its own because it didn't have to bring a lot into the continuum lead up to Endgame. So Spider-Man, Black Panther also is a good movie apart from being a good Marvel flick. But that is a special case because this movie was just important to so many people, so there was even more pressure to make it good. Guardians of the Galaxy 2, starring Michelle Yeoh, were pretty solid, and also Doctor Strange as well. And on the other side of the spectrum, you get the previously mentioned Ant-Mans or Civil War, I do not believe was a good movie, especially if you get into the psychology of characters. They were all very poorly characterized. Well, and I think the Avengers films were mediocre. There is also the question of Captain Marvel, but that's way too controversial. I'm not going to get into that. So, in general, the lack of soul it was a big problem. Second thing that I really disliked was that aforementioned lack of character psychology, just like lack of understanding of characters. Sometimes, and to be honest, most of the time, the amazing casting was what made you feel sympathetic towards certain characters. But when, for example, Wanda, who's one of my favorite comic book characters, Scarlet Witch, was introduced, they introduced her as a woman. They insisted on calling her kid, but she was a grown woman who, in order to exact revenge on people, became a Nazi because she joined Hydra. So, because she was later to become sympathetic, we were to ignore the fact that she's a Nazi, but I never could quite do it. I mean, I am totally ready to forgive her because I believe WandaVision is great, but I'll get into that later. And another example of that would be the fact that if you think of Avengers, you assume that they were a family and they were friends. But apart from the shawarma scene and the party around the Thor's hammer and lifting it scene, there weren't really any team building moments. You can believe that Hawkeye and Black Widow are close because they have a backstory, but Thor didn't really bond with anyone. There weren't actually any scenes that can make us believe that Tony and Steve are friends. All of that happened off screen and in the comics, but the comic canon does not translate over to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So the comics and also fan fiction and in general the fan culture did a lot for the character development and the understanding of the characters. So yeah, I might sound pretty maudling. I hope that it's clear that I do like some parts of the MCU. I literally enumerated the ones that I liked, but most of them do not really stand the test of time and are not great movies. And the last thing that made me bummed is most of the continuation for MCU will happen in TV shows. And I hate TV as a medium. There are shows that I liked, but now there is not really another big event that all the movies are leading up to. And the fact that there are now so many universes, mutants are going to be introduced, there are Eternals, there's Captain Marvel and whatever happens with her, Thor just going around with, I think, Guardians of the Galaxy right now, Loki doing his stuff. The universe is now so vast that I do not believe that all of them can conclude in another big event. So just keeping along with it is such a big commitment, and I was scared that in order to really enjoy all the newer pieces of media, I'm going to have to watch them. I was now informed that WandaVision and Loki stand on their own, which is great. Still, don't really like shows. But my biggest fear for MCU was that they were not going to put any effort or a lot of effort in movies. I mean, I had high hopes for Thor, Love and Thunder, and I think Spider-Man has the potential to be great. I am super biased, I just love Spider-Man. But I had fears for Doctor Strange and other installments for the characters that we know. Black Widow was a huge disappointment. I might make a video on it sometime soon. But then, just having seen one trailer and not particularly being intrigued by it, I went to see Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, starring Michelle Yeoh. And this movie was so good, guys. It was just so great. I love absolutely everything about it. I think the timing for it being an Asian culture inspired movie is particularly great and also easily explainable, because there is this big boom or just push towards giving Asian Americans a lot of voice, and I'm all for it, with sometimes with rom-coms like Crazy Rich Asians starring Michelle Yeoh, To All the Boys I've Loved Before, Always Be My Maybe. There are the children's cartoons such as Raya and the Last Dragon and Over the Moon. I think Mortal Kombat kind of counts because I think they were trying to be just with the way that they took the inspiration from this culture. G.I. Joe, Snake Eye, Genesis as well. In general, a ton of Asian American movies, and now this, which is definitely one of the best installments. So it's great. I think it takes a lot from the Chinese culture. I am not an expert. There is a ton of lyrics which are subtitled in Chinese, which I really appreciated because it makes it feel more authentic. It's obvious that people who are born in China are going to speak that language, but it was also explained in text why it makes sense for them to speak English as well. The casting is splendid, but that's the expectation for Marvel. They're always going to have amazing casting. I really like how at this point, after Raya and the Last Dragon, Over the Moon, and other films, it's kind of leaking down into social consciousness, and we're more aware of the Asian mythologies and myths. For example, I don't know, dragons, Chinese dragons and their elements, and just in general stuff like that it feels more familiar if you watch it. So it's great because for some people it's going to be a totally new experience, but it's very easily comprehensible, partially because Asian culture is so present in the cinema right now, which I stand. I am really interested. So, getting into the movie, I love that this movie is set beautifully on the peripheries of the MCU, like literally, geographically is on the peripheries. There are certain tidbits that make you aware of the fact that it takes place in the broader MCU universe, such as, for example, flyers for post-blip therapy to people affected, or just people taking supernatural occurrences in stride. So that's great. The mythology, which I already gushed about, is totally unrelated to anything in the MCU. Completely. Which is great because, for example, before Endgame, in general, any new mythology you would assume would have something to do with Infinity Stones and bring something to the table. But now Infinity Stones are no longer really relevant, so this whole universe and its mythology is something completely separate and new, which I really appreciate. Another thing that I really enjoyed was the aesthetic of the movie, the costumes, both more the fantasy and the actual clothes that the characters wear. I think I really enjoyed the way they were portrayed, but there is this modern Asian armor thing that I've seen in Mortal Kombat, in Snake Eyes, and here. I don't know, it might become a trope if something in costumes can become a trope. I'm not going to explain the details, but there is in general a look for male Asian heroes that I've seen a couple of times at this point. I have complained already about the characterization in the worse Marvel movies. The good ones have good characterization, but my biggest gripe was with Avengers and their lack of relationships between them. Guardians have a good friendship and good basis of friendship, but this movie I think is something else and even goes a step further, because in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 I did not really like certain parts, and I do not think, not the time and place for discussing that, but in general the characters introduced in this film had very deep, believable bonds, and I really liked how the characters were sort of gray and they were allowed to not be black and white. They were allowed to be more complex with the understanding of the gravitas of their actions, not like on Scarlet Witch. So the characterizations that you can look forward to, and the friendships between the characters, and the sibling relationships and parental relationships, all of them I think are really, really, really neat. There are two more things that I want to mention that I think are really, really important. First one is the narrative importance of fight sequences. I think this movie has one of the best fight sequence storytelling employed in MCU, and also it's very interesting because the fight styles in this movie are, well, Kung Fu is named. I think Tai Chi is sort of also utilized, but I know nothing about Chinese martial arts. But the fighting styles in this movie are very distinctive from each other, and their differences make narrative sense and also build the characters up, and are just amazing and a joy to watch. Moreover, the fight scenes, not only from the actual fight styles employed, build up the characters, but also the fight sequences and the fights itself are kind of like dialogues between characters, and you learn about their relationships by observing their fights. And the way that they are filmed, I think they are paying homage to like Asian martial arts cinema with the way that they are framed, and their theatricality, their theater aspect, and also like the shots and the angles used. It just looks like martial arts cinema, especially with the suspension of disbelief as to what is physically possible to a human body. I mean, we're speaking about a world where there is magic, but still, the movie makes it believable that a normal person could fight like that if they were in this particular circumstances. I think I had a weird accent when I talked about that. And the last thing that I wanted to talk about is the blessed lack of cognitive closure on some things. Marvel is notoriously bad. Cognitive closure is this, or need for it, is this thing where you want everything to be explained. I think that's a need that American audiences tend to have, but also movies, because of the limited time, usually, especially American movies, tend to just tie up all loose ends. I'm not talking about cliffhangers, but just tie up all loose ends. I might make a video on how that made Black Widow that much worse for me. But to me, it makes sense sometimes to not something fully. In this movie, they dangle some pieces of information in front of you for the whole movie, and then they become completely irrelevant. Some characters are just there for pizzazz. I am specifically messing things up a little so that you won't have something spoiled, but specifically in MCU, not having something explained feels so fresh, but to me it's not in a frustrating way. It's both of those things have comical resolutions, which I think makes it easier on the people who have a high need on cognitive closure. But in general, I like that these characters were just there for comic relief up to a point, and not for the furthering of the plot, which is usually the norm. And I think with that I will wrap things up. Go see Ten Rings. It is so good on so many levels. And I'd give it, right now emotionally it's like 10 stars for me out of 10, or 5 out of 5, whatever. Emotionally it nourished me and made me feel good. If you enjoy hanging out with me, consider subscribing. Upcoming videos is a summer movie review. I'm also going to do an Amsterdam guide, what to see in a weekend, and it's also kind of a little bit of a vlog. It's going to be pretty nice, I swear. And I also might have the Black Widow cognitive closure video out sometime, or not. I'm still debating that one. Anyhow, see you later, and bye bye.